It's the 50 who must look out for the regular permanent garrison of Jerusalem. The number 50 suits perfectly with the Amarna letters. These are letters from the various kings back and forth to each other and military officials dating before the Assyrian Empire, but it's the same picture. And Nibley, I'll discuss the Amarna letters with you in one of Nibley's books a little later. These are where the military forces are always so surprisingly small, and a garrison of 30 to 80 is thought adequate, even for the big cities. So that's right, 50 is right in between 30 and 80. It's strikingly vindicated in a letter of Nebuchadnezzar. Now this is Lehi's contemporary. We're talking Nebuchadnezzar of Babylon, the one who came and destroyed Jerusalem. We have one of his letters. Isn't this fun? Now we read his letter, and we get this. The great king orders, as to the 50s who were under your command, those gone to the rear, or fugitives returned to their ranks. Now it's interesting that one of the biblical scholars comments on this letter, and he says, in these days, it is interesting to note the indication here that in the Babylonian army, a platoon contained 50 men. Also, we might add that it was called a 50. And that's precisely how Laban is described in the Book of Mormon. Laban and his 50. Fun little details like that, huh? Very interesting. So now we move into 1 Nephi chapter 4. And we're making our way through. This is where Nephi says, okay, let's go back up to Jerusalem again, and keeping the commandments of the Lord, and behold, the Lord is mightier than Laban and his 50, or even Laban and his 10,000s. He says, and then this is where he brings in Moses. Now remember, the e-source, the northern source, emphasized Moses and the prophets. And this is one such emphasis here in the Nephite record, where Nephi constantly draws his examples of strength in the Lord, his ability to do all things that the Lord commanded, exactly like Moses. And he uses Moses. Let's go be strong, like unto Moses, he says. For he truly spake unto the waters, and they divided hither and thither, and our fathers came through out of captivity on dry ground, and the armies of Pharaoh were drowned in the waters of the Red Sea. Behold, if this was true, you know it's true. An angel has told you it's true. Wherefore can ye doubt? So let's go. Let's go up. The Lord is able to deliver us, even our fathers, and to destroy Laban, even as the Egyptians. Now, Nephi's example is well known in association with Israel's deliverance from bondage. But Yahweh performed several other miracles. Of all the stories off the brass plates from the 5 books of Moses that Nephi could have used, he uses the one where Yahweh kills his enemy. Isn't that interesting? Nor does Nephi stop short of making the comparison between their own task, that is, him and his brother's task, and the drowning of Pharaoh. In verse 3, he indicates that they are to destroy Laban, even as the Egyptians. So he wasn't planning consciously to kill Laban. In fact, he never did. However, this is foreshadowed. So it's kind of interesting that Yahweh was foreshadowing in words that, of course, Nephi would eventually take. Now, the idea of Nephi saying, let us be strong. David Bakavoy, a specialist in ancient Near Eastern languages and history, Judaic studies, notes, biblical scholar Michael Fishbane has noted that, judging from a host of ancient Near Eastern and biblical sources, it is quite certain that phrases like, be strong, or do not fear, they originally served to exhort an individual to take courage in the face of a new and a difficult task. He has further shown that in the Old Testament, the phrase, be strong, was specifically used in military orations and exhortations. So Nephi saying that, let us be strong, is a beautiful ancient Near Eastern usage of words. Not let us be brave, but let us be strong. And then Nephi says, when I spoke these words, they were still wroth, of course, but they nevertheless did follow me up until we came without the walls of Jerusalem. This is one of those places where Joseph Smith, in translating the Book of Mormon, with Emma, he stopped. He looked at Emma and he goes, hey, I need you to get a Bible and look it up. I didn't know Jerusalem had walls. Does Jerusalem have walls? And then Emma went and looked it up and said yes. And she said later on in her life, in an interview, she said, this is one of the many things that Joseph Smith didn't even have a clue about in the Bible. He obviously wasn't well read in the Bible at all. He had to have me look up these walls of Jerusalem. So the argument that Joseph Smith had a Bible right next to him and was constantly referring back and forth to it to include in the Book of Mormon record, there's absolutely no evidence that Joseph Smith even had a Bible with him, nor that it was open, nor that he was researching. None of the witnesses explain that. So that's kind of interesting. Now, considering Nephi's speech to his brothers, it was pretty effective because they did follow him up back to the city. See, they had ran out of the city and often hid in the caves. And they bothered to come back. Now, they know now that the authorities could very well find the dead body of Laban. You know, you got to be careful here. This is tricky. But he does go alone. So, did Nephi persuade them to go only by assuring them that they did not need to enter the city again? We don't know that. We know they didn't go with him this time, though. They stayed out of the city, in the outer walls. Did Nephi have a plan? No, he didn't. He was just simply being led by the Spirit. See, this is how his story is set up, so that now this is the third attempt. Now the Spirit of the Lord can begin entering and carry out the Lord's plan. Now it's with the strength of the Lord that Nephi is going. So this is a beautiful narration theme here. Now, I was led by the Spirit, not knowing beforehand the things which I should do. I went forth, came upon the house of Laban, beheld a man fallen, and he was drunken with wine. And I beheld and found that it was Laban. Now, although Nephi says he was led by the Spirit, this certainly does not mean a totally blank and volitionless mind, because Nephi went near Laban's house, because he'd been there before, so he was hovering around there. He almost certainly knew that that was most likely where he would find Laban. And he did, but he was dead drunk outside. He was completely wiped out. And I beheld his sword, and I drew it forth from the sheath thereof. And the hilt thereof was of pure gold, and the workmanship thereof was exceeding fine. And I saw that the blade thereof was of the most precious steel. Now this is one of those instances where Daniel C. Peterson, and Joanne Seeley, and John W. Welch, and several of the Noel B. Reynolds, several of the scholars who produced that video, A Journey of Faith, about the Arabian escape of Lehi through Arabia. This is one of those evidences where they say, this demonstrates, we think, that Nephi was a metal worker, because that's what he noticed. He noticed the steel and the workmanship and the blade and the hilt. He noticed the details, and that is how a metal worker would notice a sword. So this is kind of an interesting situation here. And it came to pass that I was constrained by the Spirit that I should kill Laban. And I said in my heart, whoa, wait a minute. Never at any time have I shed the blood of man. And I shrunk and would that I might not slay him. Now, it's hard to tell whether the Spirit urging to kill Laban came before or came after Nephi drew Laban's sword. The narrative says later. However, why would Nephi have drawn the sword in the first place? It does not seem like a good moment for idle curiosity or aesthetic admiration. Now, this is an interesting point. See, these little details that Brant always notices. It's very interesting. It's not the time to, whoa, hey, let's check out his shoes and his clothes. No, he's on a serious mission. So, given Nephi's consciousness of being led by the Spirit, it seems highly unlikely that he planned to steal the sword. I hypothesize that the Spirit prompted him first to draw the sword, and then gave him a clear command. And actually, that's quite sensible. Of course, because Nephi is writing from memory, the sequence may have made far less of an impression on his mind than the act he was commanded to perform, and that makes sense too. And despite Nephi's awareness of the Spirit's presence, he resists. He struggles with the commandment and attempts to deflect it. He understands that killing Laban may fall under the injunction not to murder, because he was familiar with the laws and with the Scriptures. Now, the typical Middle Eastern sword is depicted as a short piece of steel. It's almost like a dagger instead of a sword. Such a small weapon may seem like an improbable instrument of decapitation, however. Laban's sword may very well have been very different. During Avraham Etan's excavations at Vera Jericho, a site 3 miles south of Jericho, a metal sword was recovered. And the description is interesting because it's 3 feet long, and it's about 3 inches wide. It's a pretty big sword.